Wow, I'm back in record time. Aren't you impressed? I'm sure the craze has died down by now, but I'm still spending copious amounts of time trying to find the perfect CCD censored camera that I might actually use enough to justify keeping. Plenty of point and shoots have come and gone, and whilst most of them are perfectly usable, they're not necessarily something that I gravitate towards and actually want to use, outside of making horrendous YouTube videos. But that couldn't be much further from the truth when it comes to the Canon S90. The S90 has a CCD 1/1.7 of an inch sensor, which is small, but it is a 10 megapixel camera. Now plenty will scoff at 10 megapixels, but it's plenty if you want to print up to A2 in size. Like anyone prints their pictures. Or looks at them ever again. Plus having a low megapixel count on these small sensored cameras is actually preferable, because you don't get as much noise and smudginess in the image. 6 to 10 megapixels seems to be the sweet spot for these compact cameras. The Canon S90 produces very crisp images in full daylight. Oftentimes with these little compacts you'll get noise and artifacting even at low ISO, even in daylight. And while that is the case in low light situations on this camera, you do get clean images in broad daylight, although a little noise never hurt anyone, and frankly photographers need to stop worrying about it so much. The ISO on the Canon S90 ranges from 80 to 3200, and like I said, gets you really crisp images in daylight. The nighttime shots at 1600 aren't terrible either, but there is a weird in between where you feel you have enough light in the early evening, but just end up with a smudgy mess regardless. It's just the limitation of a 1/1.7 of an inch sensor, unfortunately. But if you're really lucky, you might just get away with posting some of the images to social media without getting mobbed for no good reason. Or you could just go the route I did and never post anything online at all, which will do wonders for your internet career. Speaking of travelling around and not uploading to social media, the Canon S90 is really sleek and compact and easily slips into any pocket. The body is made of metal, so it's really solid and tactile. You just want to hold and handle it because it feels so smooth and sturdy. There's no creaky, plasticky feel. With regards to build quality, the only thing I don't like is one of the two mode dials. The one in question being the mode dial around the barrel of the lens. I love these dials and wish all compact cameras use them, but this one is a little bit too loud and cheap feeling to me. It's confident enough, but I just wish it was more dampened and wasn't so loud and clicky. There's a function button to change the operation of the lens dial, so if you're in aperture priority, you're not stuck changing the aperture with it. Just press the top button and now you can toggle the function onto white balance, exposure compensation, as well as some other useful options. A really well thought out feature, I think. That clickiness wouldn't matter as much, except I have the camera pretty much exclusively in aperture priority mode. As that suggests, you can take manual control of the camera settings with manual, aperture and shutter priority, as well as a P mode. As well as that, you can shoot RAW with the full 10 megapixels as well, although if you want to shoot RAW and JPEG simultaneously, it is possible, but you have to delve into the menu to switch it on for some reason. And you have to select RAW from the quick menu instead of the L, which represents the size of the JPEGs you're capturing. This lets you shoot RAW and JPEGs, and I thought I'd have to choose between the two at first. I'm not sure I can be trusted to get my JPEGs to look impressive in camera. Sometimes you have to lean heavily into the RAW files so that you can make yourself look at least slightly competent on YouTube. Speaking of JPEGs, you can do my favourite Fujifilm-esque customizing of the looks in camera with control of contrast, sharpness, saturation and skin tone, as well as customizing the reds, greens and blues. There isn't any noise reduction controls on this small sensor though, as it will probably destroy the details on a lot of images, making them look really smudgy. The choice would have been nice though. I like that you can clearly see the effects of your edits as you change the settings in the quick menu as well. Some of these cameras allow you to change the settings, but you can't actually see the live view and results of your settings as you dial them in, so it's a welcome UI choice here. If you don't want to play around with looks, then there are preloaded styles for you to choose from as well, and the mode dial on top will allow you to select a scene which will sort out all the settings for you. But us photography snobs wouldn't be caught dead, would we? Next to that on the PASM dial you'll see a low light mode which will make use of the fast f2 to f4.9 zoom lens, which has a 35mm equivalent range of 28 to 105mm. You may even need to use the onboard flash in this mode too, and whilst I don't really like using flash, there is a certain nostalgic party look to the images that people like to emulate. Your low light performance is helped out even further with the optical image stabilization the camera provides as well, which is a great include and very much appreciated. On the back we'll see what feels like a massive 3-inch LCD screen, and whilst there's no viewfinder, which is usually a big detractor for me, the screen is so big and bright on this camera that I can forgive this transgression. If it wasn't for all the great features on this camera, then the lack of a viewfinder would get the Canon S90 a real scathing review here, which I'm sure is something that they really want to avoid from a YouTuber no one's ever heard of on a 15-year-old camera. Here we also see our second mode dial, so not only can we control the aperture on the front, or toggle that to control manual focus, but we've also got a back dial too to do some exposure compensation. It's just easy and slick and there's very few hurdles to overcome. One thing I don't like about this section of the camera though is that the middle button of the back circular dial needs to protrude out from the dial a little bit. This dial spins loosely on my model and it's easy to try and hit the middle OK button, then either change a setting on the D-pad or the value of the spinning dial itself. A small change like raising the middle button upwards away from the dial would save a lot of annoyance. And I'd know because my entire life revolves around avoiding small annoyances. That's why I don't talk to anyone. This back button is for a Canon printer by default, but it can be changed to a custom button thankfully, so I have it set to auto exposure lock. The menu's nice and simple, as these Digicams tend to be, and there's the equivalent of a quick menu which allows you to go into more depth with regards to your white balance, drive modes and metering settings. Live view isn't quite as snappy as you'd like by today's standards. You need a rough idea of the results you're going to get when dialing in your settings, then half press the shutter to focus and expose, and that will give you the result you're about to capture, albeit with a small amount of lag, which does get annoying when you're firing off shots all day. Not too big a deal, but we're really spoiled by today's snappier, much faster cameras. Optical performance is impressive for such a small camera, but flares do appear on the screen in certain scenarios, although they don't necessarily show up in the final image, so be sure to try your luck. You never know, you might end up with a good shot. Although you probably won't. Macro was disappointing as well. The closest you can get is with the wide angle lens, but no matter how far away I was, the autofocus was really erratic and often just wouldn't land. This is where the function ring and customization button on top of the S90 comes in. Very quickly you can switch the lens ring to manual focus, and with the help of the punched in zoom on the screen, you can nail focus without any issues and even pull the camera back and forth to work out how close you can get. This is why I love these manual dials. That being said, you actually can't get anywhere near as close with this as you can with other point and shoots, some of which have your subject actually touching the front element, so it's a bit disappointing on the macro front. All in all, it's a smooth experience, rigid in its construction, but also elegant and tactile enough to want to pick it up and use it. During testing, I genuinely took this out with me whenever I left the house. I even took it to work with me because, well, who wants to do work at work? The S90 is a real testament to Canon and an example of how cameras should be built. Beautiful, functional, tactile, and made to last. I've gone a bit philosophical and serious on you now, so... So, pooter.